Imagine a scream that no one is meant to hear. A king's scream, trapped deep within the stone walls of a castle, silenced by a pillow and a red-hot poker. This is the legend, the horrifying whispered end of King Edward II of England, an end said to be orchestrated by his own wife. She arrived in England as a 12-year-old girl, a French princess meant to be a symbol of peace. They called her Isabella the Fair. But by the time her story was over, they would call her the She-Wolf. This isn't just a story of a royal marriage gone wrong. It's the story of how a humiliated child bride became the only queen in English history to raise an army, invade her own kingdom, and violently tear the crown from her husband's head. It's a story of revenge, served not cold, but burning hot. Our story begins not in the darkness of a dungeon, but in the glittering halls of the French court, the most powerful in Europe. Isabella was the daughter of Philip the Fair, a king known for his ruthless efficiency and striking looks, a trait he passed on to his daughter. From birth, she was a political asset, a pawn in the great game of dynasties. Her destiny was sealed early. She would marry the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward II of England. The marriage was meant to be the final stitch in a tapestry of peace between two rival nations. For young Isabella, it was the promise of a crown, of becoming a beloved queen in a new land. She was raised to be the perfect consort, intelligent, beautiful, and demure. She understood her duty. What she could not possibly understand was the man she was about to marry, or the profound personal betrayals that awaited her across the Channel. As she sailed for England in 1308, a girl of 12, she was leaving behind everything she knew for a future she believed would be golden. If you want to understand the forces that forge a tyrant, then make sure you're subscribed, because this queen's journey into darkness is one you won't forget. The first sign that something was terribly wrong came the moment she stepped on English soil. The new king, Edward II, was there to greet her, but his eyes and his attention were fixed on another man. His name was Piers Gaveston. He was a Gascon knight, charismatic and arrogant, and he held a complete and total sway over the king. Witnesses at the time wrote that Edward rushed past his new bride, his 12-year-old queen, and threw his arms around Gaveston, kissing him full on the lips. He showered Gaveston with titles, lands, and, most insultingly, with the very jewels Isabella had brought with her as a wedding gift from her powerful father. The royal court was scandalized. This wasn't just a close friendship, it was an obsession that eclipsed all of Edward's duties, including his duty to his new wife and his kingdom. For Isabella, this was more than a personal slight. It was a public humiliation on an international scale. The coronation should have been Isabella's moment of triumph. Instead, it became her deepest shame. Edward gave the highest place of honor, not to his queen, but to Piers Gaveston. He was tasked with carrying St. Edward's crown, an honor reserved for the most senior members of the royal family. Worse, Gaveston paraded himself in royal purple and was adorned with the Queen's own jewels. The English barons, proud and powerful men who already disliked Gaveston's influence, were seething. They saw a king who prioritized his favorite over his own wife, his own nobles, and his own kingdom. Isabella's uncles, who had traveled from France for the ceremony, were so disgusted by the insult that they stormed out and returned home. Isabella was left isolated, a foreign child in a hostile court, married to a man who seemed to have no use for her beyond the political alliance she represented. She was queen, but she had no power, no influence, and no love. She was a ghost at her own feast. The English nobility was not going to stand for it. Led by powerful men like Thomas, Earl of Lancaster, the king's own cousin, they saw Gaveston as a threat to the stability of the realm. They weren't just jealous, they saw a king being led astray, ignoring matters of state and draining the treasury to enrich his favorite. They drew up a list of demands known as the Ordinances of 1311. At the top of the list, the permanent exile of Piers Gaveston. Edward, facing the threat of open civil war, was forced to agree. He sent Gaveston away, but it was a promise he had no intention of keeping. Within months, the king's favorite was back in England, more arrogant than ever. Edward had broken his solemn oath to his own barons, setting the stage for a bloody confrontation. For Isabella, this period was a masterclass in the politics of power. She watched, she listened, and she learned how a kingdom could be turned against its king. The return of Gaveston was the final straw. The barons, feeling betrayed, took matters into their own hands. They hunted him down, cornering him at Scarborough Castle. After a brief siege, Gaveston surrendered, believing he would be given a fair trial. He was wrong. While being transported south, he was abducted by the Earl of Warwick, a man Gaveston had mockingly called the Black Dog of Arden. Warwick had once sworn, "If he escapes, let me be a sinner before God." He intended to keep his word. Gaveston was taken to Warwick Castle, subjected to a sham trial, and condemned to death. On a desolate hill, the king's beloved favorite was brutally executed by beheading. The king was devastated. He was plunged into a deep grief and a burning desire for revenge against the men who had murdered his friend. The kingdom was now fractured beyond repair, split between the king's faction and the powerful baronial opposition. And in the middle of it all was Queen Isabella, now a young mother, watching her husband's weakness and his enemy's ruthlessness and filing it all away. For a time, in the wake of Gaveston's death, it seemed things might change. With his favorite gone, Edward began to lean more on Isabella. They had a son, the future Edward III, born in 1312, securing the succession and giving them a common purpose. Isabella proved herself to be a capable diplomat and a trusted advisor. She acted as a mediator between her husband and the hostile barons, helping to negotiate a fragile peace. For a few years they ruled together. She was no longer the sidelined child bride. She was a respected queen and regent, undertaking diplomatic missions to France on her husband's behalf. It's possible that in this period, a genuine, if not passionate, affection grew between them. She had the son and heir he needed, and he finally seemed to recognize her intelligence and worth. The kingdom was still a mess, plagued by a disastrous war with Scotland, but the royal marriage at least seemed to be on solid ground. This was the queen she was meant to be. But this peace was just an illusion, a calm before an even more destructive storm. The vacuum left by Piers Gaveston was not empty for long. A new power rose at court, this time far more dangerous. They were the Despensers, a father and son duo both named Hugh. Hugh Despenser the Younger, in particular, quickly became the king's new favorite. But where Gaveston was merely arrogant, Despenser was systematically greedy and ruthlessly ambitious. He and his father used their influence over the king to amass an incredible amount of wealth and land, often by disinheriting other nobles through legal trickery and outright intimidation. They were despised not just for their influence, but for their corruption. They were a cancer on the kingdom, and their target was total control over the throne. And once again, King Edward was blind to the danger, completely enthralled by his new favorite.
This time, the humiliation was worse for Isabella. Gaveston had simply ignored her. Despenser actively worked against her. He saw her as a rival for the king's ear and a potential threat to his power. He began a systematic campaign to isolate her. He had her most loyal servants dismissed and replaced them with his own spies. He restricted her access to the king. He controlled her finances, reducing her to a pittance, forcing the Queen of England to beg for funds. He publicly demeaned her. And King Edward allowed it all to happen. He chose his favorite over his wife once again, but this time it was different. Isabella was no longer a child. She was a grown woman, a mother, and a seasoned political operator. The first betrayal had confused and hurt her. This second one forged her anger into a weapon. The Despenser's greed eventually pushed the barons too far, sparking another civil war known as the Despenser War. But this time, Edward, guided by the ruthless Despensers, was ready. At the Battle of Boroughbridge in 1322, the king's forces crushed the baronial opposition. The leader of the rebellion, Thomas of Lancaster, the king's own cousin and the man who had ordered Gaveston's death, was captured. Edward finally had his revenge. Lancaster was subjected to a humiliating show trial and brutally executed. With this victory, all opposition was silenced. Edward and the Despensers now ruled England as absolute tyrants. There were no checks on their power. They confiscated lands, executed rivals, and ruled through fear. The kingdom was their personal property, and anyone who stood in their way was destroyed. With their enemies defeated, the Despensers turned their full attention to the final threat to their power, Queen Isabella. They convinced the king that as a Frenchwoman she could not be trusted, especially with England on the brink of war with France. In an act of unparalleled cruelty and stupidity, they had all of her English lands confiscated. Then came the final, unforgivable blow. They took her children away from her. The young Prince Edward and his sisters were removed from her care and placed in the custody of the Despensers' allies. They had stripped her of her wealth, her influence, and her children. They had left her with nothing but her royal title and a burning, all-consuming hatred. They thought they had broken her. They had actually just created their own doom. Then Edward and the Despensers made their fatal mistake. A dispute with France over the territory of Gascony was escalating towards war. Edward, a poor military leader, was terrified of leading an army abroad. The Despensers, universally hated, were terrified of being left in England without the king's protection. They needed a diplomatic solution. And who better to send to negotiate with the King of France than his own sister, Queen Isabella? It seemed like the perfect plan. They would use her royal connections to solve their problem. They would send her to Paris, let her talk to her brother, and keep her on a tight leash. In March 1325, they sent their most dangerous enemy away from their control and into the arms of her powerful family. It was the single stupidest decision of Edward's reign. The moment Isabella set foot in Paris, she was a different woman. She was no longer a prisoner in a hostile court. She was home. She was the sister of the King of France, surrounded by people who loved and respected her. She quickly and skillfully negotiated a peace treaty. But then she refused to come home. She publicly declared that she would not return to England until the Despensers were removed from power. She began to gather a court of her own, made up of English exiles who had fled the Despensers' tyranny. And among them was one man in particular, Roger Mortimer. Mortimer was a powerful and ambitious lord from the Welsh marches who had been one of the leaders of the Despenser War. He had been captured and imprisoned in the Tower of London, but had made a daring escape to France. He was everything Edward was not: decisive, ruthless, and a brilliant military commander. He and Isabella found common cause in their hatred for the Despensers. Soon, that common cause blossomed into a passionate love affair.
Back in England, Edward and Despenser were panicking. They sent furious letters demanding Isabella's return. She refused. They cut off her funds. Her brother, the King of France, paid her bills. They were losing control. Isabella then played her masterstroke. The peace treaty required the King of England to pay homage to the King of France for his French territories. Edward didn't want to go, so Isabella made a counter-proposal: send their son, the 13-year-old Prince Edward, to pay homage in his father's place. It was a brilliant move. Edward couldn't refuse without breaking the treaty and starting a war. Reluctantly, he sent the heir to the throne to Paris, directly into the hands of his estranged wife and her lover. With the heir to the throne at her side, Isabella was no longer just a wronged wife. She was the leader of a legitimate alternative government.
Now the plan shifted from protest to outright invasion. Isabella and Mortimer began to assemble their forces. They traveled to the county of Hainaut, a territory in the Low Countries. There they made a deal. They betrothed young Prince Edward to Philippa of Hainaut, the daughter of the local count. In exchange for this prestigious marriage alliance, the Count of Hainaut provided them with ships and a small corps of professional soldiers. With this, they began to build an army. They were a strange sight: a queen, her lover, and the young heir to the throne, gathering a ragtag force of mercenaries and disgruntled exiles to invade one of the most powerful kingdoms in Europe. It was an incredible gamble. If they failed, they would all face a traitor's death. On September 24th, 1326, Isabella and Mortimer launched their invasion. Their small fleet landed on the coast of Suffolk. They had only around 1,500 men. It should have been a suicide mission. But something incredible happened. The country did not rise to defend its king. Instead, it rose to join the queen. As Isabella marched inland, her army swelled. Powerful nobles who had been waiting for their moment, like the Earl of Norfolk and Henry of Lancaster, brother of the executed Thomas, brought their own armies to join her cause. The common people, who hated the Despensers for their greed and the king for his weakness, welcomed her as a liberator. The regime of Edward and the Despensers, which seemed so strong and terrifying, was a hollow shell. It collapsed like a house of cards. The news of Isabella's unstoppable advance sent London into a panic. The king and the Despensers, realizing the game was up, gathered what treasure they could and fled west, hoping to find support in Wales, the heart of the Despensers' power. Their flight left a power vacuum in the capital. The citizens of London, loyal to the Queen, rose up in a violent revolt. They stormed the Tower of London and murdered the king's remaining officials. When Isabella's army reached the city, they were not met with resistance. The gates were thrown open, and she was hailed as a savior. In less than 2 weeks, with almost no bloodshed from her own army, Isabella had captured the capital and effectively won the war. But Isabella's work wasn't done. She wanted revenge. She and Mortimer pursued the king and his favorites relentlessly. The royal party tried to escape by sea to Ireland, but storms drove them back to the Welsh coast. For weeks, they were fugitives in their own kingdom, hiding in the mountains, cold, wet, and starving. Finally, in mid-November, they were found and captured. The King of England and his all-powerful favorite were taken prisoner without a fight. Hugh Despenser the Elder had already been captured and executed. Now his son's turn had come, and Isabella was going to make sure his end was a public spectacle of unimaginable brutality. The execution of Hugh Despenser the Younger was designed to be the ultimate expression of Isabella's vengeance. He was charged with treason and theft. He was not given a chance to speak.
Dressed in a black tunic with his crimes written on it, he was dragged to the public gallows. First, he was hanged but cut down while still conscious. Then, in front of the cheering crowd, the executioner cut off his penis and testicles because he was accused of sodomy with the king, and threw them on a fire. Then his stomach was sliced open, and his entrails were slowly pulled out and also cast into the flames, all while he was still alive to watch. Finally, his heart was cut out, and his head was struck from his body. His body was quartered, and the pieces were sent to be displayed in the major cities of England. Isabella and Mortimer presided over the entire event. This was not justice. This was a brutal, personal, and theatrical revenge. With the Despensers dead, only one problem remained: King Edward II. They couldn't simply kill him. Killing an anointed king was a taboo that could turn the public against them. Instead, they engineered a political solution. A parliament was called, and a delegation of nobles was sent to the captive king. They presented him with a choice: abdicate peacefully in favor of your son, or they would disinherit his son and place a non-royal on the throne. Broken and defeated, Edward had no choice. In a tearful ceremony, he surrendered the crown. His 14-year-old son became King Edward III. But everyone knew who was really in charge. Isabella and her lover, Roger Mortimer, were now the de facto rulers of England, acting as regents for the boy king. But the deposed king was still a problem. As long as Edward II was alive, he remained a potential rallying point for any noble who became dissatisfied with Isabella and Mortimer's rule. He was a living symbol of their treason. He was moved from castle to castle, his location kept secret. Finally, he was placed in the custody of one of Mortimer's loyal followers at the remote and imposing Berkeley Castle. Reports from the time, likely exaggerated for propaganda, claim he was kept in a dungeon, forced to live amid filth and decay in an attempt to make him sick so he would die of natural causes. But the former king was strong, and he clung to life. A more permanent solution was needed. In September of 1327, the world was informed that Edward II had died. The official cause was natural causes, but almost no one believed it. Rumors began to circulate immediately, rumors of a horrific secret murder. The most famous and gruesome story which emerged years later is the one that has defined this moment in history. The story goes that his killers, wanting to leave no marks on his body, held him down and inserted a red-hot poker into his anus, burning him from the inside out. It was a death of poetic, terrible cruelty, a symbolic punishment for his alleged homosexual relationships. Local people claimed to have heard terrible screams coming from the castle that night. We will never know for certain if this is true. It may have been black propaganda, but what is certain is that the deposed king died in a very convenient way, at a very convenient time for Isabella and Mortimer. For 3 years, Isabella and Roger Mortimer ruled England. But power corrupts. They quickly began to act with the same greed and arrogance as the Despensers they had overthrown. Mortimer, in particular, was insatiable. He took the title Earl of March and awarded himself vast estates, especially in Wales. They made an unpopular peace treaty with Scotland, formally recognizing Robert the Bruce as king, something Edward II had resisted his entire reign. They enriched themselves and their followers, alienating the same nobles who had helped them take power. The liberators were quickly becoming tyrants. And all this time, one person was watching, waiting, and growing into a man, the young King Edward III. Edward III was his mother's son. He had her intelligence and her ruthlessness, but he also had a strong sense of duty and kingship. He was disgusted by Mortimer's arrogance and his mother's affair. He would not be a puppet king.
In October 1330, the young king staged a daring coup. With a small band of loyal friends, he used a secret tunnel to sneak into Nottingham Castle, where his mother and Mortimer were staying. They burst into Mortimer's chambers, overwhelming his guards. Isabella famously cried out, "Fair son, have pity on the gentle Mortimer!" There would be no pity. Roger Mortimer was arrested and dragged away. Edward III asserted his authority immediately. Mortimer was charged with a long list of crimes, including assuming royal power and contributing to the death of Edward II. He was condemned as a traitor and, without a proper trial, was hanged, drawn, and quartered. Edward showed his mother a surprising amount of mercy. He did not execute her or imprison her in a dungeon. Instead, he forced her into a lavish retirement. She was given a generous income and allowed to live in comfort at several royal castles, most notably Castle Rising. She was stripped of all political power, but she was treated with the respect due to a king's mother. She lived for another 28 years, a ghost of her former self, the she-wolf with her teeth finally drawn. She had burned a kingdom for her revenge, only to be sidelined by the son she had placed on the throne.
So, who was Isabella of France? Was she a monstrous, adulterous traitor who murdered her own husband? Or was she a survivor? A queen pushed to the absolute limit by years of humiliation and abuse, who did what she had to do to save herself, her son, and her kingdom from a disastrous king and his corrupt favorites. The truth, as always, is probably somewhere in between. She was a product of a brutal age, a woman who played the game of power with a ruthlessness that shocked even her contemporaries. She was betrayed, and she became a betrayer. She was a victim who became a victor, and then a victim of her own success. Her legacy is complex and bloody, a testament to the fact that hell hath no fury like a queen scorned. What do you think? Was Isabella a villain or a tragic heroine? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and thanks for watching.